I would need to learn a lot. I don't know nearly as much as you and probably the rest of your listeners do about Amazon. My natural curiosity, like I always tend to look at stuff. I go down weird YouTube rabbit holes about that stuff as of late. But no, the reason why I would choose Amazon is that Amazon as a marketplace has a built in just audience.
Ladles and jelly spoons, boys and grills, welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast for 6 and 7 figure Amazon sellers. Now, I'm going to go crazy and imagine if you're an Amazon seller, you may want to broaden your sales channels from Amazon, not least because of the suspension risk that we all have hanging over our head like a sword of Damocles if we sell just on Amazon. So a lot of Amazon sellers I know, quote unquote, are also seriously considering selling on Shopify or another direct to consumer website. And indeed, many of them are. But it's not a simple transition. So we're going to talk about all things to do with that sort of that space with Chase Clymer. So Chase Clymer is my guest today. He's the co-founder at Electrici. They create Shopify-powered sales machines, like the thought, from strategy and strategic design and development decisions. He's also the host of a podcast. So kind of dubious congratulations from me. I know how much work that is. A weekly podcast with honest advice to increase sales and grow their businesses. That's Honest Ecommerce if you want to check that out. So Chase, that was quite the resume. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Second time's the charm, everybody. A little behind the veil there. We screwed up the first time.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Guess what? You get to do things second time much, much more cheaply in digital media than you do with products, but the same basic thing applies. So Chase,
Absolutely.
obviously you're a direct-to-consumer kind of focused guy. I'm a Amazon focused guy, but I am familiar with the idea of talking to somebody who shock horror doesn't sell on Amazon or does, but mostly focused on Shopify because I've been running a podcast with my co-host there, Jason Miles, who's a Shopify fanboy. So it's not a complete, utter culture shock, but nevertheless, this always comes up. Let's deal with this first kind of slightly crash question first. If you were going to start an e-commerce brand today, what would you use, Shopify or Amazon, and why?
You're not gonna believe my answer. I would probably use Amazon to if I was going to start a brand, I would use Amazon. I would need to learn a lot. I don't know nearly as much as you and probably the rest of your listeners do about Amazon. My natural curiosity, like I always tend to look at stuff. I go down weird YouTube rabbit holes about that stuff as of late. But no, the reason why I would choose Amazon is that Amazon as a marketplace has a built-in just audience. Therefore, you can test and find product market fit of whatever product insanely fast versus trying to do that on Shopify. And we will probably get into that specific piece a lot here soon. But the key word to your question here, if I was going to start a brand today, what would I use? I would start on Amazon to test my product to get some initial feedback, but I would probably rapidly iterate once I find initial success in a marketplace type setting into trying to build an owned audience on my own platform from a profitability and just my opinion of a sustainable, sellable business. I believe, and this I could be wrong here, and this could be another great part of conversation. It's a little bit more of an asset if you have an owned audience versus the type of audience you get with an Amazon store.
Amazing. So that's a great answer straight out of the gate. As you say, I'm learning all these Americanisms these days. Occasionally my British friends or family kind of stare at me
Well,
because
I
I
want to
speak
learn all
foreign
of
language.
yours so I can surprise my friend's wife because she
I can
she's
teach you
derived
some
from where
interesting
you're.
things, but most of them are quite rude because we're quite direct here in Britain. But so first of all, interesting. So start versus expand. Very, very interesting that you got that difference there. I'm not going to argue that you got a more sellable business in some ways, or it's certainly more defensible. So the multiples of profits that I expect to get for an owned sales channel and owned audiences, you put it, which is an interesting phrase, are certainly going to be more valuable. The sellability of it partly depends on whether people are hunting for a particular type of business, right? We had the whole Amazon aggregators thing and they went completely crazy one way and now they're going crazy the other way. So in other words, they were buying everything which had some kind of sales and now they're selling, buying nothing. So, but yes, that's excellent reasons. Now let's dig into a few of those things. First of all, um, at what point then would you start iterating? And what point would you say, I've got enough products tested? Because presumably if you've got one product that's, you've tested three, you found one product that takes off really well on Amazon, I'm guessing that's a little bit early to transition to Shopify, or am I wrong?
So this is the rub in e-commerce, regardless of what platform you're using, is finding product market fit. I think is the hardest thing in the world, and it's kind of this ubiquitous term. And I ask founders on our show all the time, like, when did you think, in some roundabout way, I asked them, like, when did you think you had it, or how did you know that you were onto something, right? And that the question it really is, it's like, when did you get product market fit, and trying to reverse engineer how they did it, right? And what I've learned from hundreds of these interviews is it has to do with them just continually being obsessed with their customer and asking for feedback and iterating on the product. And once it shifts from kind of needing sales to like organically just getting sales, right? It's this they're just happening on their own. I believe like you start to get onto something of product market fit. Now, if you were to a number, right? Throw something like out there in the thousands, I think it really depends on your average order value and stuff like that. You need to be just getting a decent amount of sales a month. But if I was just gonna like draw a line in the sand, it's like you build this thing up to like 5 figures in revenue a month, just in top line, right? I think that that's probably a decent like telltale sign that you're onto something here. This would be worth investing in building out your own channel. And those types of hard numbers, like, I'm going to use a lot of like thousand million, like $10,000 like numbers all today, and just going to get out there and say it's like everyone's unique. I'm just kind of drawing a random line in the sand with some of these things. But if you've got these indicating factors and you really believe in it, ask someone that's smarter than me, and they'll really let you know what's going on. Um, but one thing I will say about when should you transition, there's another question there. It's like, should you transition, period? And it depends on your product. And so if I was going to build a product, I would build a product that was more on the luxury side and less on the commodity side, which is already, I believe, harder to do on Amazon. I don't know. Let's say I'm not an Amazon expert, but it's, you want something that's less commoditized. Amazon loves, I would say like a deodorant's commoditized, but like a luxury merino wool sweater brand would be more on the luxury side, where you are selling about the benefits and the value of the product versus the solving for a need. And when you find brands that are like that, something that's more commoditized tends to be lower on the average order value side of things with thinner margins, whereas something that's more on the luxury side of things tends to have higher margins and is a higher AOV. The reason that matters is brands that have low margins and low AOV tend to continue to have that when you build your own platform, and the juice might not be worth the squeeze when you come out with the same result as far as profit and sales, building, investing tens of hundreds, whatever, into building out your own Shopify store where it just is the same amount of money you were making on Amazon, but you just start doing it in two places and it's twice the amount of work.
Yeah. And probably more than twice the overheads, I'd imagine. So that's very, very interesting. So a couple of reflections then from, I always take notes partly because it helps me absorb all the great stuff that experts like yourself bring. And the first thing is the commodity versus AOV, by the way, average order value, just in case
Yeah.
anyone's missed that one.
Well, they did something different on Amazon, isn't it?
I would call it average order value, but maybe it's something else that I haven't come across. I've heard most of the abbreviations in the Amazon space, but there's
Yeah.
always a new one. Anyway, so that's what we're talking about. So could you give a couple more examples of that? Because I think this is a really excellent question. Should you transition at all? I.e., you start on Amazon and then do you actually bother moving anywhere else?
Yeah.
Of
I mean,
sort of commodity type things that you would suggest not doing. Because I'm just mentally going through my clients' brands and thinking, would they be a candidate based on this very excellent way of looking at it?
well, here's a great kind of thing too, is like the way I think about e-commerce just instinctively in direct consumer brands is a little bit different than the way you think about brands, I think a little bit, because Amazon's world has a lot of like resellers as well. And I would probably just say, don't do it. Like if you're a reseller, stick to Amazon and eBay and all those other marketplaces, because it's they have such a higher amount of people looking for those types of refurbished or used products versus building out your own brand. To do that is going to be an insane amount of work to get the same result. And what I mean is it's going to be a lot of work to invest in content marketing or paid advertising to get the amount of traffic and sales on your own channel, i.e. a Shopify store, versus just doubling down and doing what already works on your Amazon store. So, an example of like a reseller would be like you're great at selling used books or video games or camera equipment, right? Those types of things where you're doing something that one, it's not your own brand, right? that I would say probably not going to find success on your own Shopify store. Now, on the flip side of that is if you're building out a cool product, something in like a new product line, I'm trying to think maybe like a coffee brand. I know there's a lot of really successful brands doing coffee, especially like the Keurig type stuff, or what's the other one? An espresso. That, that could go both ways, right? It really depends on how you want to play it and how you want to spin it. What else would be a good example here? I think furniture could go both ways, really, to be honest. I think that just where you're putting the price points and the value and just the work that goes into the content on there, you could really go both ways on that. Home goods are pretty successful on both platforms, I think.
So let me ask a different way of dividing it up then. So I guess we talked about average order value and margins. So we probably ought to put some kind of, as you said, how long's a piece of string, but some kind of numbers on that. But also before we even get into that, then let's ask another more fundamental should you transition type question. Your metric that you just used was top line revenue. And yes, there's always a crude metric and it may be, variable in different markets, but let's say 5 figures, so $10,000 or pounds a month up. But what about the size of the catalog? Because my understanding, and this is an interesting sort of broader discussion before we plunge back into this specific question.
Yeah, no,
My
no,
understanding of the equation you're solving for with their owned, what do you call it, direct to consumer site is the cost of acquiring customer versus the long-term customer value. And obviously a part of that is the average order value, right? So do we therefore need to have a big catalog in order to make that viable? Is that even the right equation? And let's just deal with that.
that's such a good question. That's gonna send us down a different little rabbit hole. But first, catalogs on Amazon, you can kind of get away with being a little more unique and interesting with your offerings because you could have, some art supplies and some used books and be selling electronics in the same Amazon account. And it, doesn't affect the brand because conceptually to the customer, this is an Amazon store. Whereas if you tried to do that same exact just roll up of products on a Shopify store, someone's going to be like, "What the heck is this internet bodega?" And it's going to be probably not as successful because it doesn't make much sense, right? So with product catalog, it's like when you're building out your own store, the key here is you're building a brand. Like this is going to be branded products. You're going to be investing in content, copy, whole nine yards to really elevate this thing above just a t-shirt. No, this is the best men's t-shirt for guys over 6 foot, right? You're getting really specific and solving a real problem and really leaning into this thing. So as far as catalog size goes, if you have one flagship product that rules, I would say go for it. You can go build out your own store. And this is now where you start talking about e-commerce in general. It doesn't have to be a Shopify store. If you just build out your own store on any platform, I'm going to say Shopify because I love Shopify. But, you know, if you're talking to any e-commerce expert, like everything's a nail if all they've got's a hammer, right? So, but like say you've got this one flagship product that's crushing it on Amazon. And to your question of like, what would you love an average order value to be? Above $75, because the cost for acquisition for paid ads on like the direct consumer side of things is just outrageous these days. And if you can like out of the gate have an average order value above $75, you're gonna have much part margin in there to start to pay to acquire customers through Facebook and Google and not cry about it. So back to, you've got this flagship product that's doing really, really well. You having one product with one story to tell, with one offer to iterate upon is infinitely easier to you just mentally as a founder or an owner, however you identify, than like having a dozen products you're trying to test and iterate upon and do this with, like, that you just don't have the mental capacity. That's something I find a lot of people doing wrong is they are trying to do too much all at once. And it's really just like, no, simplify it. Do maybe two or three marketing activities, like in one per kind of stage of the funnel, and call it a day. Like once you get over to the platform and you're really building it out. But I believe I answered most of your questions there, kind of in a
think you
roundabout
did.
way.
Yeah, I bung too many in classic interviewing. No, to put too many questions in one go. After like 1,000 interviews, whatever I've done for this podcast now, I should know better. But
No, it's
um,
fine. I'm hitting you with stuff that's making you genuinely curious, is what
yeah,
it's throwing
yeah,
you
I'm
off your game.
genuinely curious. So the AOV, so really, and I suppose we talk about average order value. I guess the number that matters is the gross profit, right? I guess so. You got the cost of acquiring versus the profit, and the average order value at $75 plus. is going to be only relevant if the profit margin's at a certain level, right? So
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
and just
So what sort of profit are
historically,
we needing roughly, do you think?
40 plus is what you wanna shoot
40
for.
plus. Okay. Yeah.
If you can get away with it, the more the merrier, because this is just cash in your pocket.
Of course it is. Yeah.
The more margin you have to play with, the more you can spend to acquire a customer, to grow the business, to make that next big purchase before the holidays. Like, there's a lot of reasons to do it. A lot of
Yeah.
first-time founders set their price point by the market and not by and by what I mean there is they set their price point based upon, like, what are other people on Amazon selling this for? Which is just completely crazy idea to me. It's like, no, like, how much can you sell this thing for? Just because everyone else is selling this product for $25 doesn't mean you can't sell it for $45 with better pictures and a better story.
Mm. Yeah, that's very true. So just to clarify the nuts and bolts, profit $40 that's $40 rather than 40%.
Oh, like per see, now we're getting all over the place because
Yeah.
it like per item, it really depends. Like, is this brand selling like one item that's over
Mm.
$75 or is it a bundle that's going over
Yeah.
$75? But
Good questions. Yeah.
I was definitely more on the 40% range, is kind of like
Okay.
gross profit margin.
Okay, so just to put it in really simple numbers then, just with the understanding that how long's a piece of string and this is all
Yeah.
relative. So the profit margin of 40% plus and an average order value of $75 plus gives you a sort of reasonable fighting chance of acquiring the customer and not crying about it. Is that a summary
Yeah,
that's fair?
basically, if you talked to any paid media professional, which I am not, I just know too much about this industry because I've been in it forever, and they're going to ask you specifically, like, what's your best offer? What's your average order value, right? Like, what's your gross margin on your products? And then they're gonna run the math real fast and be like, well, you have a fighting chance here. This is something that's scalable with paid ads. We're talking about Facebook or Google or, there's TikTok now and all those other ones, but that's the question they're gonna ask. And if those numbers aren't there, it technically doesn't mean the end of the world. There are other ways to get, more eyeballs on your product, but for the first route that everyone kind of looks at, which is paid media, those are kind of the numbers that you want.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a beautifully clear answer. And look, I know it's an average and all the rest, but that gives you a wake up call, which explains why my clients who are selling successful on Amazon, running a Shopify store where they're making whatever, a £50 sale and £10, so that you could be dollars, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
£10 gross margin, and their cost of acquiring customers £20, which I think is actually pretty good. But of course, if you've got one product selling for £50 at 20% margin, which is a little bit low anyway, but then of course, or maybe it's a higher margin, but the £10 is what they get out of it. Then of course, that's not
Yeah.
scalable, right? That's not doable.
I was just in Austin, Texas 2 or 3 weeks ago for an event called the Whaleys, which was kind of an award show put on by a new e-commerce app called Triple Whale. They do kind of a first party pixel, help you with analytics, a really attribution for your ad spend, right? And during this, the guys from My First Million did a live podcast, and this conversation kind of came up during that podcast during the Q&A, and someone was talking about, oh, if like I've got a gross margin that's under 20% on my product and it's kind of a one-time deal, like what should I do? And I believe it was Mazad Lee. He said, I would find a new business to run. He's like, I don't mean to be mean. He's just like, but why would you invest all your time and energy in something that isn't that scalable? Right. So sometimes people need the hard truth. I'm also on that podcast. I ask a question if you want to go find me. I don't know if it's out yet though.
Mm. Yeah, and by the way, hard truths are, yes, I've had conversations like that many times with clients. The ones I prefer are out of your catalog of, if you built up a big catalog over time. Often resellers will do this, but the same basic principle applies. I think in private label, I've got clients who've had like up to 2,000 product lines, which is a heck of a thing to manage. But anyway, it breaks down to the same thing, which is don't sell this, this, and this. Why would you? Because you keep saying you have to have a big catalog for some abstract reason, but you could put all the same capital into these things over here with a 50% margin that are going out of stock, unsurprisingly, right? So that's always my argument. Do you have the same kind of discussions with your clients?
Oh man, it's so often it's this Socratic questioning. You just keep asking why till you get to the root of it. And it's like, well, because my competitors are doing it. And it's like, cool. Do you know that they're profitable? Like, or are you gonna
Yes.
take the advice of like the school of wisdom? There's
Yeah.
obviously reasons to break the rules. And I see many, many businesses doing it and doing it well, but you kind of need to take a step back. If it isn't working for you, maybe invest your energy somewhere where it is working.
Yeah, beautifully put. Well, that's going to be an end of a section in the podcast in my mind, because that's you can't argue with that. And to your point, I'm going to mess my own podcast editing up now by saying this. You make an exceptionally valid point, which is this really super simple. We can see what our competitors' unit sales are. You can probably extrapolate pretty accurately the revenue. You have no idea about the cost structure. I mean, you don't have no idea because you probably use the same suppliers if you're unlucky enough to be private labeling very similar products. But you don't know the exact deal, and you certainly don't know what the cash, even if you know what the profit and loss is, you have no idea about the cash flow structure because they might have a deal where they pay for stuff once it's landed from China versus you're paying up front, which changes the working capital. Do you know what I mean? So then the behind the scenes economics of the products are the things that matter. And we never get to see that. I mean, in Britain, you can go and look at their company's house reports and get a bit of an idea, but they won't tell you very much, really.
I have the same exact conversations with clients when we're talking about Shopify stores, about their kind of marketing channels, even the offer that they're presenting, and it's just they'll get caught up in this kind of thing where they need to be doing what their competitors are doing, and we're like, why? Like, we know what works for you. Why don't we just double down on what works? And that's often like that in a nutshell should be just free consulting to everybody. Is you already have something that's working, probably just double down on it. That's the next step. Just keep doing the thing that works until it won't anymore. That's
Oh,
something that a
man.
lot of people get caught up with, is they think they need to do something else in parallel with what's already working. It's like you haven't even maxed out what you're doing right now. And oftentimes it comes down to, like, if you do paid media and it does work, just spend more in the channels where it works. You know what I mean? Level up the team that's doing that, and keep doing it, be it Amazon ads or Facebook ads for like a direct consumer store that you have on Shopify. But, you know, that's often like, I'm usually sometimes telling people not to work with us. I'm like, why would you? This looks fine. Just go keep doing this until you do need to work with us. Because like I think people just, keeping up with the Joneses is another Americanism. You like got to do what everyone else is doing, and
We said the exact,
if
yeah, we
if
said the same thing
everything's
here.
important,
Yeah.
nothing's important, nothing's
Yeah.
going to work.
And by the way, I was just laughing when you said, why don't you just double down what works? Because I was saying the exact same thing to a client today. Like, he's fairly early stage, doesn't even hit six figures yet. But I was saying, I know it sounds really primitive and simplistic, but I promise you, this is what the most best paid consultancy work with one of my clients who got to multiple seven figures in under the pandemic and, still doing very well. And this expensive consultant who's built businesses to $100 million a year revenue, whatever, I said, why don't you just double down on what works and simplify? And like, it honestly comes down to that. And that just sounds like you read a business book once and putting yourself out as a consultant. It sounds almost fraudulently simple, right? But you're so right. I've got to just say it's a relief to hear somebody else saying the exact same thing. So look, Jason, you mentioned what you said. We're going to talk about optimizing existing stores in the next show, but I'd love to just give you a chance to tell us what you do over at Electrici in more specific terms.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, it comes down to two things at Electric Eye. We are usually either migrating brands from a legacy platform over to Shopify. We've done a few transitions or helped people get set up from Amazon as well. I'll be very blunt with you about whether or not I think that's a good idea. And then, so building net new stores, helping people with their themes, building like new designs for existing Shopify stores. So that's kind of like half the business. There's a lot of big project work. And then the other half of the business is the more nerdy stuff, which usually happens after the first part, which is retainer optimization work. So we're jumping into the data. We're learning about the frustrations, the uncertainties, the reservations that their customers have through nerdy stuff like heat maps, scroll maps, customer interviews, building hypotheses onto as why they're not selling things, or things are getting in their own way. Where's the friction points of the website, and making the website better, right? We're doing kind of more traditional CRO stuff. Kind of within those things is, we believe maintenance is kind of CRO as well. And so we kind of have a nice fluid retainer relationship with our clients, where sometimes we do need to tackle something that's not as fun, but we'll get it done for them. In general, we're Shopify experts through and through. We're not just saying it. We live it, breathe it, do it. It's all we do.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, when you say these things, I mean, the optimization store thing, I mean, I guess maybe you and I share a sort of nerdy gene because I like that stuff. And I think one of the reasons I like it, and I can totally understand why a lot of people find it boring because they're more creative side, perhaps, is because of this. Like, you've got the same input revenue or products to sell on the shelves, whatever, and you can, with the same inputs, create a better output or get the cash to turn faster. I find that kind of magic. I guess it's like being a good mechanic, right? So I think there's something magic about great conversion rate optimization for
Absolutely.
what it's
And
worth.
the number one way to increase your return on ad spend, which is constantly going up. Well, the cost per ads is constantly going up. So the return on ad spend is constantly going down because your products probably aren't going up in price to match it. But back to what I was saying is like the best way to increase your return on ad spend is to increase your average order value and to increase the conversion rate on your website, which is basically what CRO does.
Yeah, and CRO, by the way, conversion rate optimization again, if you haven't come across another three-letter abbreviation in the world of them on online. Well, that sounds great stuff. So obviously you've got your podcast, Honest E-commerce. I think it's honestecommerce.co. Is that the place to find it?
Yes, the guy that has .com, he lives like 45 minutes away from me, funny enough, and just lets it go to poop, and I really want it. But whatever, we built out a great domain on .co and it works. But yeah, so our podcast, I'm usually interviewing brand founders and really asking them about the story, where the idea came from, what like how did they turn it from an idea into like something to test, how they like found product market fit, and how they kind of scaled it. I try to get a little more technical and nerdy. I know people like to learn the specifics and stuff, but that's the majority of the show is those interviews with brand founders, and then we do a lot of bonus episodes as well, where I'm interviewing subject matter experts, other agency owners or freelancers or consultants in the industry, people from apps or people kind of on the other side of the field. Perhaps Michael will be on talking about Amazon soon. But yeah, the show is pretty fun. You can check it out.
Sounds great. I like the idea of interviewing brand founders. I've done a bit of that. I need to make more effort to do that actually, because I enjoy those conversations because they're not trying to sell an angle and they're not slick podcast interviewees sometimes, but sometimes they have super interesting personal reasons why they started something, which is probably on the verge of being marketed to hell in their website, and then they're going to appear at an Amazon conference next year. I've seen that before. So it's kind of nice when people aren't doing that. So I believe that if you got people that are doing into the seven-figure mark on Shopify, you can do some kind of free help or a strategy call. Is that right? I've got that in my notes.
Yeah, so we have what we call a Shopify diagnostic, but I can kind of spin it off and really help you kind of figure out whether or not like coming over from Amazon is right for you, or if, should you invest in like optimizing your existing Shopify store if you've already made the transition. So that diagnostic offers out there. You can just head over to electrici.io, schedule the contact button, and just say that you heard of me from this podcast, and we'll make sure that we can get on that first call, see if it's the right fit for you, and we can get that diagnostic kind of set up for you.
Brilliant. And so would you say that applies to anyone who's doing about 1 million plus on their Amazon store currently then? You're willing to extend that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
roughly. Again,
Yeah, yeah,
I
roughly.
hate drawing hard lines in the sand here. If you think you guys got it, just reach out to me. I'll let you know if it's something that we would be helpful, like if we could help you or not. We're very honest about only taking on, things where it will work for everybody.
Yeah, makes total sense. And you got any kind of retainer, you have to work that way. Otherwise it becomes a nightmare for everyone. And yeah, so that's really, really good. I mean, I think that you've given us tons of stuff to think about. Is there anything, so we're going to talk about optimizing existing store in a minute, which obviously is your meat and drink. Is there anything else about the Shopify versus Amazon, if that's the right way of putting it, that we should have talked about?
No, I think we really dove in deep and got into some weird corners there. Just for anyone that's listening that for some reason won't listen to the next episode, I also wrote a kind of a book on the scaling stuff. So you're going to get a sneak peek of that. If you just want to head over to brandscalingframework.com, you can download our ebook, and it kind of walks you through the three KPIs that matter for like direct consumer brands, and kind of like a crash course in conversion rate optimization and marketing funnels. So it's a fun little read. It's all value, no fluff, and that will be very helpful to anyone out there listening to wants to understand more about, building your own business on like a Shopify type situation versus Amazon.
Brilliant. That's really worth having. Great. Well, look, for the moment, it just remains for me to say, Chase Clymer from Electrici, thank you so much for coming on and really interesting debate about Shopify versus Amazon. Discuss.